So I'm joined here with two special guests. I'll have them introduce themselves.
Nick Gates with Priority Power.
Curtis Harris with Compass Mining.
Amazing. All right, let's dive into it. So we're gonna start with some very low-hanging for very easy questions. So the first one is how is ERCOT planning to cope with the significant growth in energy demand, driven by folks like us?
That whole section's yours.
Well, first off, I think the load is overstated to a degree. The forecasts, projections, and how they present those have changed. So there was some large shocks that came out. Everyone starts quoting it when in all reality, it was a change in how they present it. But at the end of the day, you have a lot of developers out there. You know, these projects are large. They can't put all their eggs in one basket and say, I'm only trying to develop right here. So what they're doing is they're going and putting in 2, 3, 4, 5 interconnect requests, knowing that they might only take one of them. And with that, I think a lot of it's overstated. And your base question was, how will ERCOT handle that? And the answer is they're going to go through their models the way they always do. And the first thing they lean on is reliability. They won't give out capacity anymore that doesn't meet their minimum bar of reliability. So at the end of the day, we're probably not going to have the ramps that they're projecting, just due to the fact their modeling doesn't allow it to grow that big as it sits right now. Keep going.
Is there a political challenge that our industry creates when we ask for more load than we're going to take? Are we hurting ourselves? Do we need to adjust what we do as an industry?
The utilities are actually adjusting themselves. A lot of their newest facility interconnection agreements, they're mandating, basically if you don't hit your ramp at a certain time, you lose whatever capacity after X date. So, if you're given 500 and you only get up to 300 by that date, you now have 300 interconnect, and they now have 200 megawatts more they can give back out in the system. So they're adjusting to that. The ones that are already in are grandfathered in, but, they created another solution that had to come out in response to some of that happening. And it wasn't just our industry, it was several others. So,
I ask about the political nature because we're here at the TBC event, and I see the Texas Blockchain Council advocate well, and so ERCOT's obviously unique. It's only here in Texas, the TBC. I wonder at what level that advocacy is helping our industry. Do you have any insight on that, Nick?
There's 3 equal parts of the grid: physics, economics, and politics. It's a famous quote from an academic. I forget his name right here, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, politics play into it as much as physics and economics do. At the same time, that can be beneficial to the growth of a grid because, governments can inject large amounts of money for projects or basically push things through that might not be physically needed or economically there. For example, the CREZ, Continental Renewable Energy Zone, where they built the 345 from west to east, and then all of a sudden we have more wind production than the rest of the country. That was a politically pushed through project that wasn't physically or economically needed at that time. And right now there's other ones out there being proposed. It's basically a 765 interconnecting, like a web of the entire state, which would be unprecedented if pushed through.
That's a great question.
Great question.
So I'm going to ask something tangentially related. When I asked my first question, you said that a lot of the projected load is overstated. Can you give us a more accurate representation?
Do you want to take this one?
No, of course not. I would put on my Swami. If there is an ERCOT load Swami, it's Nick Gates.
There's more factors at play. Geopolitically, are the chips going to be available or not? That's a question. TSMC, Samsung, their plants in the state side keep pushing back. So, is the demand even going to be there from the data center side is a question mark. What other utilities are going to open up more capacity and therefore decrease the need for us to have that much located here specifically? I think there would be the ability to bring that on, but I don't think it's necessarily going to materialize that way. And at the same time, utilities aren't going to grant every request in a time frame that is workable for these projects. So, right now utilities have an obligation to serve you, but they don't have an obligation to keep the cost down or make the time quick. So, they do it reasonably within their framework, but I think some of these requests are going to have time frames at 2035 with costs through the roof. And that's not going to be viable, and a lot of what's in the interconnect queue is going to die off for that reason. And then at the same time, just looking marginally like what more Bitcoin load will come on. At the end of the day, you add more supply, prices go down, you add more demand, prices go up. There will be a threshold where miners, if we add too many and they're all curtailing at the same time and batteries come on, like we're going to bring up those prices, and due to that, miners will move out of Texas, which bring prices down, equilibrizes well. So on the mining side, I think there is like a threshold. Granted, we have a lot of new generation coming on, but at the end of the day, economics play in, and we're not going to add 5 gigs of Bitcoin mining because that'll raise prices to a point where they won't want to be here.
I surveyed the audience, and they liked Nick's answer, but no one knows. There's so many knobs and variables. Nobody knows.
Fair enough. I'm going to move on to power generation and renewable energy. So given the massive increase in demand that we're seeing, or maybe not seeing, how can we interconnect this many megawatts without building new generation capacity?
By plugging in where there's already excess capacity, identifying where there's electricity in a system that's not being utilized, and whether it's an existing substation or it's a high voltage transmission line, and you build. So that's the way you do it. Without new generation, you've got to go find where that electricity exists and is not currently being used, and plug in and access it.
Spot on there, and to take the location aspect out of it, Woody, ERCOT representative, said on stage, and I don't want to misstate here, but I know they've been working on, if you can get a Bitcoin miner into CLR, being able to model them differently. Basically not model them as firm load, because currently how it's modeled is you're the same as a hospital whenever they run that model, and they need the same reliability for your load that a hospital would have. If you're a Bitcoin miner, you don't have the same need. So if they can start modeling that differently, they can get more megawatts plugged in line, and from their side, they'll have better control over it, as well as be able to free up more megawatts to be consumed, because there's several times of the year where prices are so low that we have curtailment in wind, we have curtailment in solar, batteries aren't making any money. Like, additional megawatts being consumed is good for everyone on the system, and they've been working towards that. There's just a lot to it, and it takes a long time to change a legacy system and how it's been modeled for years without compromising their most important mandate, which is reliability.
Ishan, in retrospect, I think my answer was very simplistic. I didn't catch the nuance. So can we turn it back to you? Do you have any tricks for our industry? How do we interconnect without building new generation?
Off the top of my head, no, I don't have a good answer for that. But what I would say is that maybe moving things to recent events, right? The election, right? So if wind, solar, renewables are unlikely to meet this demand that we're potentially going to see, and with a new administration potentially phasing out tax credits, where else can where's the magic going to come from? So the question you asked me, I'm putting it back on you guys.
And kind of tying to the last question, how can we get more megawatts online without building more generation? There is a natural development cycle. Basically, you bring more demand on, prices go up. Now there's a signal to generators because prices went up, build more generation, which brings down prices, which brings on more load. And we shouldn't necessarily shy away from that. ERCOT's system is designed as a nodal system, meaning basically time of day, your location, that is how your pricing is set. So as a generator looks at the landscape, they can see when the sun's shining over here, it has high prices every day. That's a good signal to go build solar. And there's a threshold where they build so much solar that they curtail their own price to zero. So naturally, their incentive is to build the right amount of generation in the right spot. So I think what we should be doing, or how we should be looking at it, is how do we get more megawatts online, and how do we take out as much regulation and unnecessary aspects of getting more generation interconnected into the grid. And also specifically, we're in Texas, we're sitting on a ton of natural gas. That's the easy, low-hanging fruit, and there's already projects in process, and we're flush with it. There's a lot of groups in Permian Basin right now that at their wellhead, like they're having to pay $2 MCF to put that into a pipeline. They're paying, so their natural gas pricing is negative. So building out more generation where it's constrained from a pipeline standpoint makes a lot of sense, and like I think we will see more natural gas get built in ERCOT, which overall adds a lot to the reliability side and allows us to get more megawatts on.
Very complex answer, Nick. Thank you. I think my feedback is, I think the question is where's the magic going to come from? And possibly it's innovation, so technological innovation and maybe better communication. So I don't think we're going to sit in this room and move a needle at all, but think of automation and as I believe that you mentioned the election. I believe that we're about to see some sort of massive innovation in our electrical grid, and we're the right industry to support it. Like, we can consume the electrons wherever they're at, and I think that we're about to be an amazing partner to the electrical grid.
And one other piece, Governor Abbott, I think, put out a statement basically saying we want to build nuclear in Texas, take down some of the regulation around it, and be one of the more forward-thinking states in the country. There's just a lot of issues around building nuclear, which some of them are, mentally, economically. And economically is a bigger one than a lot of people give credit to. It's a very expensive build, and until that comes down or it gets subsidized, it's a hard payback, especially looking at the comparative technologies.
Fair enough. So we touched on my next question a little bit, so it's somewhat related. With the new administration, what opportunities might arise in other regions, right, of the country due to deregulation efforts?
Wow, I don't know that I have any insight of deregulation happening in new areas of the country that it's not already happening. Obviously, we're seeing our best growth that's not in ERCOT, specifically in PGP, and so in the Ohio, Pennsylvania area. But is there a push for further deregulation that's currently happening?
The conversations are happening. I haven't seen any firm legislature put forward to deregulate more areas. I think some of these regulated areas are going to run into some interesting dynamics because they control everything and they've been able to keep prices down for mom and dad in their house consuming electricity. And a lot of those guys now have inbound requests from AI guys that might not have located there previously, because the industrial rate there and their ability to hedge it's not what it was. But right now they don't care nearly as much about power price. So they're going to increase the demand in the area, and a lot of these guys that have lived off their legacy generation and not necessarily built anything and kept prices down, pricing set on the margin, and that marginal increase in demand is going to bring up prices, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on those groups in order to fix that. And a lot of times they've been anti-load and anti-development in order to fix that, and I think we're going to see a shift in some of those regions, and they're the ones that could benefit the most from deregulation because you can get private money in, you can fund more of these projects, and you can actually hit that development cycle of more load, more generation, more load, more generation, and it does keep going, self-fulfilling cycle.
Fair enough. So we're going to change gears a little bit to AI and Bitcoin mining, right? So what are your guys' thoughts on Bitcoin mining and AI being used in the same sentence now? Right? Is it just buzzwords?
From my perspective is that Bitcoin companies, especially publicly traded Bitcoin companies, are using the word AI in that same sentence for the investor effect. I think that Bitcoin mining is using AI in order to grow its book value. I think that Bitcoin mining has also dramatically changed the data center industry, and that AI is about to take advantage of the changes we've made.
I do think there is a bit of an element on the buzzword, but at the end of the day, the AI demand is real, and their need for power is quick, and Bitcoin miners have sites with the scale on them to be attractive to AI guys. The AI guys have large balance sheets, and a lot of the mining space has been undercapitalized for several years now. So it is a good match, but at the end of the day, looking at who's doing buzzwords and who's not every site is suitable to AI. So I think that's going to be one of the bigger differentiators is like, is the site actually suitable to AI from a few different, key elements of, is there workforce, remotely near to here? Are you near, a major city center already? Core you saw up in Denton, like that's right outside DFW where, it's one of the top 3 data center spots in the country. Like, so that's ideal. Well, AI is now willing to go further away from the cities than the traditional HPC guys, so it will open up more Bitcoin mining sites to be converted into AI, but how that structure actually works, who pulls it off, I think there's still a lot to be figured out, and I think we will see more done. You've seen several people in the space that are saying it, and they're saying specific sites, and others are saying, here's my overall site. Well, if you have 10 sites that are 20 megawatts each and they're not close to each other, you don't have 200 megawatt profile that could be converted into AI. You have 0. If you have a 300 megawatt site off of I-20, which is like a great backbone fiber coast to coast, like that has enough scale that they will move the people out there. They can do the construction. They can get the synergies of scale, and they can actually build those sites. So I think we will see more massive deals done, and at the same time, it's how that structure works. It's going to take some time to see like which miners actually can enter that space and which ones can't.
We're operators, so we don't self-mine. We operate mining facilities. We provide a hosting service, and we feel like there's a business model there to be operators and hosting of AI compute. We've looked at the economics of building out, and to monetize an AI data center compared to a Bitcoin mine, we've just not made that step. But what do you guys think about the opportunity for Bitcoin miners to use their expertise in operations to bring value to a new compute load?
Looking at the economics of like smaller scale, like cloud computing that you lease out, as these computers get more expensive, I don't know how much that works as much as like where I think the real demand is right now, at least where we're seeing it in our space, is for the 200 plus megawatt sites. And that's because they want to be able to build the largest cluster, because the way they're interlacing these neural networks, it's not a 2 megawatts is twice as powerful as 1. It's an exponential curve whenever they're interconnecting them the way they are. So I think the largest one right now it's either 50 or 100 megawatts. And these guys want to be able to continue to scale their site and interconnect those clusters. Once they figure out how to do it at 200, they want to be one of those ones that can make a cluster at 200 instead of having 4 separate 50s. So looking at that, like the biggest guys in the space and like what they're going after and how they're using AI, they're going after all the jobs. So versus, some guys are using some inference to, run a data set or do something else, which is, a lot of the cloud compute. The big guys are saying like, how do we get these guys, these computers smart enough that we can take all the jobs?
I'd like to learn something if I could. And maybe you two have an answer. We all know Bitcoin miners, we have this really low threshold for price of electricity, and it's clear that AI will pay more for electricity, but are they cost sensitive to the cost of the electron at all? Do they care? Does AI care what they spend on electricity?
From our current conversations, not at this time.
My perspective as well.
So they'll go hedge 100% and not worry about it. Where the forwards are now doesn't bother them. Even if they went up another 20+%, still wouldn't bother them. I don't think you'll see any of them like stay on index and not care to that degree. What I am expecting to see is, how do we get more generation online is one of the questions you floated out to us, when we were prepping for this. And there's a lot of generation that is there and not being utilized, and that's the backup generation for these traditional data centers. So, there's current regulations in place around their emissions and other things that I think some of that will get eased in the name of grid reliability. And once it does, you'll start to see them, instead of their compute changing, I think they'll change their generation strategy to basically their net load to the grid, coming off, while they're still keeping their compute on. Because at the end of the day, they can run a diesel generator still way below their cost.
Well, I like, you've had some good phrases today. I feel like you could write bumper stickers. I like AI in the front, Bitcoin in the back.
Mullet miner.
Yep.
Copyright Nick Gates. Please don't try and steal it.
Amazing. So we have a couple minutes left. I have some other questions, but I think what would be a good thing to leave the audience with is what do you think? What is one insight from this conference, or one thing that you really, really think the audience should know? So I'll go to Nick first, and then I'll go to Curtis. The most important thing that these people need to know right now.
Well, you were very confident in your Bitcoin price target of 500K by December 25. I think that everyone should know that. Go buy Bitcoin. This is financial advice from Ishan, not me. But from this conference, the most important thing I've taken away is we have a lot of people in a space that's highly competitive, all pushing in the same direction. And even though people are competing against each other, we have fought a lot of different fights within Texas in the last several years to not be diminished in our position. Lee at the Texas Blockchain has done a great job leading that charge. We're now in a spot where ERCOT's putting out presentations to show what our flexible load did during polar vortexes that come in, and we actually have enough scale that the things we were saying would be good for the grid 3 years ago, and there were very few megawatts online at that time, we now have the scale to actually show that benefit. And like with that, generators are changing their minds a little bit and coming around to, oh, these guys are, even though we're competing for capacity for, they want batteries online, and we were competing with that capacity, we're in net benefit to them because we're bringing up that base cost of power, and even though we aren't adding to the risk of the peak, that's ultimately good. So there's not more hammers dropped on from the regulation side on them or on us, and like we actually are a net benefit to the grid, and it's starting to show, and it's pretty awesome to see. If Bitcoin does hit your price projection, the benefit might change a little bit because we'll curtail at a much higher price, and it'll be interesting to see how that affects things.
Fair enough. And Curtis.
I think your question was, and Nick, I'm thankful to be here on stage with you and enjoyed your answer as well. I think your question was, last minute, number one important thing for the audience, and my answer is different than Nick's. My answer is this: it's community. It's build your Bitcoin community. Be involved, come to events, you're here, this is your proof of work. Go back to home, if that's Houston, if that's Ohio, build local Bitcoin communities. That is the future. That's my number one piece of advice.
Absolutely. All right.
Well, we're going to ask you that one. You have to at least answer one. You just said you have no more questions, so you can't skirt it off on us. What's the most interesting thing you found at this conference?
I think the most interesting thing I found at this conference is, I guess for me, I've been in Bitcoin since 2013, right, the Silk Road days. And it was extremely sketchy. It's like localbitcoin.com, like super, like I tell my parents about it, it'd be like, why are you doing this? You're going to get us on some FBI list or something. But if you look at this conference right now, you have a bunch of corporates here. People are in suits and ties. You have the Bitcoin ETF. The whole industry is legitimized. And it's exciting, and I didn't know if this would ever happen. I think there are many inflection points, where this, Bitcoin could have just been killed by the banks if they really, banks and basically the whole system, the bureaucracy, if they really wanted to. And it's really interesting to see that something that represents freedom and individuality can now and will thrive, and I think it really will. So kudos to everyone who's kind of made this happen, and I think it's a testament to everyone in this room, and excited for the future.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.